And we're back again with another repair video on the Saturn S series. Today we're going to go ahead and knock out the front brakes. But for anyone who's been following along on my previous videos on this vehicle, knows that this car had many codes and the check engine light was on, and we were trying to get it ready for emission testing, obviously because it's due for its test. And I'm proud to announce that the car did pass its test, so I'm very excited about that. And let's go ahead and get started with these brakes. So first of all, you've seen I removed the front wheel, and the first thing we're going to do is remove these two slide pins for the caliper, which you could see these are very rusted in place. So that's why I'm using a flathead screwdriver and a hammer to just bang this one out of place. They were just completely rusted in place, and that's no good. And once you get the caliper off, just go ahead and rest it right here on top of the sway bar. You don't want to leave this caliper hanging on its own weight. It could do some damage to the brake line itself. So just find a good place to go ahead and like store it so it's not hanging. And of course, try to get your brake pads out. These are kind of stuck in there. That's why I'm using a flathead screwdriver to pry them out. And when you buy new brake pads, try to get brake pads that come with the hardware kit. Sometimes they don't come with a kit and you got to buy them separate. So you really want to make sure you get these two clips right here that I'm taking off. And the reason for that is because that's what the pads slide back and forth on. So if your clips are wore out or just full of rust and things like that, they're not going to be able to let the brake pads slide freely as they should, and it could actually cause, you know, uneven brake wear or unwanted brake noise. So try to replace them always. At very least, go ahead and clean them up as best as you can before you reinstall them. And right here I'm taking off the caliper bracket, which is pretty straightforward to take off. And now you're free to take the rotor off. And here's a good shot of the rotor. You could see the unevenness as I move the camera along. And it's things like that that, you know, decide whether you should replace a rotor or not. And obviously this one is bad. You know, you don't want to put new brake pads on a rotor that looks like that. And if your hub has any type of rust on it, make sure you go ahead and clean that off like I'm doing here with a wire wheel or some sort of a wire brush. Any imperfections on the hub are going to lead to a pulsing sensation in your brake pedal, uneven brake wear, and even brake noise. And I'm applying a little bit of anti-seize here, and that's just so that the rotor in the future doesn't stick onto the hub. It's just like a little bit of added insurance. And of course, make sure you clean off your new rotor because they do come with oil on them. So I use brake parts cleaner, but you could easily just go ahead and use soap and water and it'll do the same thing. And here goes the caliper slide pins. Just like anything else that has rust on it, make sure you go ahead and clean it off as best as you can so we could apply some fresh grease to the slide pins. The hardware kit I purchased came with new rubber boots, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove these. And this long one right here is actually a lot more difficult to change than you think it would be. Now here's a step that most people overlook, and it's cleaning off the rust that's on the caliper bracket. All of the rust that builds up underneath the brake pad clips is enough to add enough friction to the brake pads to not let them move freely, and that could cause a lot of problems. So doing a very simple step like this could mean the difference whether your brake pads just slide in perfectly or if you have to try to hammer them on, which you should never have to hammer brake pads on. If you have to resort to using a hammer to install your brake pads, then something's wrong. And here's another step that's easy to miss. Inside of this bore right here, you could get a lot of rust that could just build up over the years. So you really want to get in there and just use something to clean out the rust. I really didn't have anything that fits in there perfectly, so I just ended up using a tap for my tap and die set, and I was able to get out most of the rust and using brake parts cleaner. To install the new rubber boot, you're going to have to find something that fits inside of there to help you push it through. I just happened to find this long bolt in my garage. And of course the slide pin's gonna get a fresh coat of grease, but this is the new boot right here, and I just want to pack it with some fresh grease before I actually install it on the caliper. These are the bolts that hold the caliper bracket onto the knuckle, and I'm just going to go ahead and add a little bit of blue thread locker onto them because it would be a nightmare to have these bolts back themselves out. And here I am installing the new brake pad clips. I know some people like to put a little bit of grease right here or some grease at the ears of the brake pads, but I really don't think that's a good idea because you want these brake pads to be able to move back and forth freely, and what happens with the grease over time is they collect dust and dirt and debris, and eventually it turns into a problem. It's not going to let the brake pads, so when you first apply the grease, yeah, it's going to help the brake pads move, but in the long run it's actually just gonna, you know, hold dirt and debris right there because of the grease. So I don't think it's a good idea to apply grease onto this, and just leave it as clean as possible and you shouldn't have any problems. And here I am compressing the caliper piston. Now if you didn't compress this piston when it comes time to try to fit the caliper over the new pads and rotor, trust me, you're gonna have a difficult time and you're never gonna get it to fit. So a small tool like this makes this job easy. I love this tool, it works great every single time. So make sure you have a way of compressing the caliper piston before you try to put everything back together. And that's pretty much it for changing your front brakes on your Saturn S series. I hope the video helped you. If it did, give it a thumbs up. And of course, like always, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.